case that has dragged for years. Manji Vadiola lives to tell a story on what transpired at the Westgate Mall on 21st September 2013. He was in the building when the mall was almost brought down as gunfire rented the air.
Sasa mimi nilikuwa naumia, nimepigwa risasi karibu mbili hapa na mbili pande hii. Alafu baadaye mimi tutalala kwa gari.
The horrific scenes of the fateful Saturday morning have left him with nothing but scars of pain.
Nilikuwa naumia, nimepigwa risasi karibu mbili hapa na mbili pande hii. Alafu baadaye mimi tutalala kwa gari. Baadaye mimi naamuka, nakaa kwa kiti tena, naanza kupiga honi. Alafu watu mbili nasikia anakimbia, anatoa mimi.
He says though the court has found 2 suspects guilty of the terror, his life will never be the same. His wife recalls how she received the news.
Najua 1 week tu mimi hapa naongea, hakuna kitu mimi najua mahali mimi iko.
Nasema mimi bye bye. Alafu mimi naomba Mungu, Mungu iko nini? Saidia mimi.
On the other hand is Ramji Patel. He was commended for his heroism and bravery that saw most of those who were under hostage in the building saved.
But in our cross-firing ranges with them, when our officer with us was shot, so we left amidst the time of incident, but I had seen him physically, how he looks like, but not that clearly 100% to make sure that I can go and identify ni kwamba ilikuwa huyo.
Ramji saved more than 50 lives when the attack happened. He says he will still do the same even today.
Hizo marisasi zikilia, mimi niliona wakiwa watatu, mimi niliona na macho yangu watatu. Wengine hata bado wakati tukigangana nao, wengine walikuwa natupiga marisasi kutoka kando.
Even though the case has dragged on for 7 years, survivors say they have moved. To Ramji, the incident was a leap towards a resilient country.
All right, so those stories sort of paint a picture of the journey Kenya has come in terms of those 8 years, ever since that particular terror attack was orchestrated in Westlands in the country. So have we come of age, even as we reflect on the challenges of the past, have we come of age to secure our borders? And we want to reflect on this even as we mark that particular anniversary. As I mentioned earlier, I'm joined in studio right now by 2 individuals who will add impetus to this particular conversation. Dr. Mustafa Ali, who's an expert on terrorism and working closely with the National Counter-Terrorism Center. Thank you so much for your time. We're equally joined by Dr. Oscar Githua, who's a forensic psychologist, equally working closely with the NCTC. That's the National Counter-Terrorism Center. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. And let's begin as we reflect on those 2 stories that have just run. 8 years later, Dr. Ali, what can we learn from the past? Have we made strides towards not just improving the security within and outside our borders, but also, you know, changing the narrative when it comes to communities and the psychological assistance? There's so much to talk about this. Let's reflect on the journey so far, 8 years on.
Thank you, Jesse. Kenya has made tremendous strides since the Westgate attack in 2013, when those misguided murderers walked into Westgate and brutally murdered Kenyans, and effectively, basically just desecrating the name of Islam, the religion that they claim to be fighting for, and desecrating this day, International Day of Peace, 21st of September, commemorated globally. What has happened from that time is that the security apparatus, community engagements by the government of the Republic of Kenya through the National Counter-Terrorism Center has been something that has been very effective, engaging communities to delegitimize this kind of actions that we saw 8 years ago, to work with faith leaders, to work with communities across the Republic of Kenya to ensure that this kind of action, attack on Kenya and Kenyans is something that Kenyans will never forget and will always work against, to ensure that we, as a country, do not go back to this kind of rhetoric that we saw during that time. Al-Shabaab and others running narratives that were being, in some cases, praised by equally misguided people that supported the cause of Al-Shabaab and other terrorist organizations.
Okay, so we've definitely made strides in terms of NCTC and the security agencies working in terms of changing the communities and making them resilient. But I'll still belabor on that point, Dr. Githu. As a forensic psychologist, what best approach do we use to build up resilient communities, especially fighting against terrorism? Because we hear of active terror cells time and time again within the country, and we see of incidences where they're actually stopped even before they happen. Keen to note whatever happened in Mombasa with the security agencies. Talk to us about this, breaking down the thought process and especially the radicalization that might happen within communities.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for this opportunity. I'll begin by saying that, of course, as a country, we've made strides, as my brother, Dr. Mustafa, has alluded to. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to help in the recovery efforts, starting from Westgate and all of the subsequent attacks in the country from a psychological point of view. And what I can tell you is that in 2013, probably was the first really mass effort. I mean, after the 1998 attack on the US Embassy, of course, saw a lot of organizations coming together in what was called Operation Recovery. But in 2013, we came and did a recovery effort in psychological trauma interventions, where we did what is now known as psychological first aid, where we involved a lot of people in the community. We worked with them consistently for about 2 weeks on the ground near the site. And then after that, we did follow-ups, and we ended up working with people, some of whom until today probably have had their lives changed completely. Now, in terms of the resilience of communities, it cannot only be done by one profession or one person or one class of people in the country. What the National Counterterrorism Center has done is come up with what is called the National Strategy for Countering Violent Extremism. And this is a strategy that addresses what are some of the issues that need to be done and improved around the country to actually ensure that we are safe and we prevent this from happening again. So, of course, you're talking about various things. And so how NCTC has engaged communities is through what are known as the county action plans. So every county in this country has a plan which they actually are working with their county security and intelligence committees with the population, and also, as my brother Mustafa has said, Dr. Mustafa has said, working with religious leaders, working with people in education, working with people in the community, so to speak, so that at least all members of the society do not feel left out. And some of the issues that had actually been addressed from way back, talking about marginalization and things like those, are now addressed differently, because not all counties have the same issues, and all the counties have a unique way of approaching how they can actually engage with each other to reduce the chances that any of our young people can be radicalized. I know that you have asked the question also about what are some of the things that drive a young person to be radicalized, but I think let's handle a few more questions and then we can get into that, because it's really wide and broad. But one of the things I can talk about is that you have to really pay attention to young people. I think the generation of young people that were there to just be seen and not to be heard is long gone. Okay. At this point, if we do not listen to what young people require, what they need, engage them in positive and pro-social ways, we're really actually leaving a gap for those people who might actually have the means to radicalize young people, to step into that space, radicalize them, and probably turn them into enemies of our country.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's really proper. Dr. Ali, still on radicalization, I know it's a broad subject, but so many people in the coastal region sort of air their grievances in terms of perhaps being targeted by security agencies due to perhaps links which might be existent or non-existent to terror cells within and outside the country. And we've had human rights organizations term some disappearances as being enforced by security agencies. How do you respond to this? Because it's a dicey situation, right?
Jesse, thank you. It's It's very difficult. The war on terror, which began way back 20 years ago, is a new kind of war. It's asymmetric warfare. It's unconventional. The terrorists hide in the midst, within the population. They carry out their activities. They plan their terror attacks from within the population themselves. And so the security agencies in this country have had to work extra hard to flush out very few terrorists from within a large population of generally law-abiding Kenyan citizens. And in doing so, when these terrorists and extremists are flushed out and are taken to court, then they are tried and charged. And we've seen successful prosecution and sentencing, like we just saw on the screen about the Westgate attackers. And you clearly see that those actually that are charged and were sentenced are those that supported the attackers that were killed at Westgate itself. So it's normally a network of people. Okay. And it's very important that we as Kenyans support the security agencies to stabilize this country, to flush out extremists and terrorists who continue to legitimize their actions through nebulous narratives, through platforms, community networks that are there. It's good now that they've moved away from mosques. In 2011, 12, 13, 14, mosques were actually used, like Masjid Musa in Mombasa, as platforms for recruitment. And with the help of government, the community has worked extremely hard to ensure that these mosques, the places of worship, are not used by terrorist groups and organizations.
But what about enforced disappearances? You still haven't talked about that particular point, Daktari.
Well, you know, I don't work for the Kenya police, and I'm unable to talk about enforced disappearances. This is a question that you will need to ask the relevant authorities itself about those enforced disappearances. What we are focusing on, Jesse, is community engagement. This is the work that we do to delegitimize the narratives of terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and Daesh that are active in this country, that are active in this region. And unless we do that, unless we address the intimidation by such groups, then we are not going to be successful in the work that we do. And I'm very happy that various communities, which if you look at 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, the relations between the Christian and Muslim community was actually becoming challenged because these terrorists were supposedly targeting Christians. And we had also to work hard to engage our Christians brothers and sisters and say that, look here, the reason why the terrorists are targeting Christians, as they did in Mandera and killing many Kenyans, is because they want to raise a brother against a brother, a Kenyan against a Kenyan.
Okay. Divide and conquer, sort of. So, as you add your voice, Dr. Githua, let's talk about psychological assistance, because you highlighted you're quite instrumental when that unfortunate incident happened in 2013. And I also remember the media was put on spot as well, in terms of the psychological trauma that was sort of forced on members of the public through our dailies. And editorial policy sort of changed, and the approach was better in terms of the Dusit terror attack and all that. But let's talk about psychological assistance. How important is it, and how long does it last? In terms of the post-traumatic growth following a terror attack, can it last until 8 years on? And how best do you approach this in order to rid this individual of the thoughts, the traumatizing thoughts that occurred years past?
Thank you so much, Jesse. I think if we focus on the psychological aspect of the traumatization that occurs after a terror attack, we first of all have to identify who we do not call them, in psychology, we do not call them victims, but we call them survivors. We only reserve the term victims for people who actually probably died as a result of the attack. But for survivors of the attack, we have to, first of all, begin by classifying who are we calling survivors. And survivors, for me, if you look at them, there's 4 categories of survivors. And this has to be very clear to Kenyans, because the work that we do really goes beyond the event and the news cycle of covering the attack itself. So, for example, if we begin with the people who were at the location of the attack, for example, people at the Westgate Mall, Garissa University, and probably the 14 Riverside complex attack in 2019, the people who survived could be one of the first people we work with. The second group of people are the first responders, and these first responders are including security apparatus, other people like St. John's and also Red Cross. Those are also other people who are survivors. The third group of people are the community at large that's around there, and the country as a whole, because, of course, being violated by these attacks that we've actually faced, that is actually a group that we look at. And the last group that nobody ever seems to think about are the family members of the perpetrators. Many times nobody imagines that the family members did not have an idea of what happened or of the planning, but many times we've found that a lot of the family members had no idea of what their loved one was doing. So what do? In such cases, we work with each and every person at different levels. Definitely, we begin with the survivors who are at the scene, and so we work with them using what I alluded to earlier, the psychological first aid as the first mode of working. Psychological first aid can be deployed by people who are lay people and not necessarily psychologists, but then psychologists are important in terms of making sure that we can flag any reactions that might not be normal at the time. And so, of course, if you're not able to sleep, if you're not able to, if you have anxiety or whatever it is, as long as it lasts about 30 days, that is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And so, therefore, we do not pathologize anybody during that time. What we provide is just a psychosocial support, letting them, just know that it's normal. We kind of stabilize their life at that point. But then, beyond the 30 days, you find that now we have to do a bit more, work, but with fewer people. The data suggests that after an attack, about 85% of people will actually, after 30 days, will actually go back to a normal response. But then about 15% of people will have complications from the attack. So when you ask the question, how long does it last? It actually lasts a long time depending on the effect of it on specific people. If you lost someone, if you lost a limb, if you, for example, were very close. I know of cases of people who were close to the attackers, but then they were not harmed. And so they live with what you call survivor's guilt, and we've really been dealing with that for a very long time. So these modalities, and in fact, one of the things I wanted to add is that in the beginning, the government never used to be involved in these psychosocial responses because it was seen as a purely security response. But then we discovered that one of the ways you can actually secure the country is by securing the mental health of the citizens. So in 2019, the National Counterterrorism Center was actually at the forefront of the response after the 14 Riverside complex attack. And we actually did that work very well, and I'm proud to be part of the team that did that as a team leader. And I can tell you for a fact that until today, we have people who have complications, but we work with them for long. But what I can say, anything beyond 6 months post-attack, very rare, and then probably you'll have one or few people who will, very few people who will actually have complications after that. However, we do work with people. We're training more psychologists as we speak, and I think that this country is better for it. And I really appreciate the fact that the head of state, His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, in 2019 recognized that mental health is an issue that needs to be taken more seriously in this country. And so therefore, I think for me, that is a really huge step for this country, because when it comes from the commander-in-chief, then everybody else follows suit, and then we actually do the work that you can see right now. Thank you.
Okay, well noted, and kudos for that. Let's talk with you, Dr. Mustafa. In terms of crisis management, when it comes to a terror threat or a terror attack, I think we've equally learned over time. The crisis management as compared to Westgate and later on, that unfortunate event at Duse D2 was quite different in terms of the security agency's response, the flow of information, and what the media was equally doing in terms of spreading the information, because we don't want to put the message out there, so it seems we're enabling a terror event. So let's talk about crisis management. At as a first responder, what exactly should I do? And later on, as a Kenyan on social media who's just received photos, maybe I haven't authenticated them, that they're from this particular attack, how do I handle them? There's so much to talk about in terms of crisis management.
Thank you, Jesse. If you look at the way Westgate was managed and Dusit D2 attack was, immediately after the attack happened, the response and the crisis management that came immediately after those two attacks were markedly different. When Dusit D2 attack happened, the security agencies, which now worked in a multi-agency approach, responded very effectively. They were it was immediate. The population knew almost immediately that this was a terrorist attack, and they evacuated those that could evacuate immediately. Those that were caught up inside the building were evacuated by those who had some skills within the building before the teams that came to neutralize the terrorists came in. It was very different during the Westgate, which I must say that then Kenya was very much unprepared. The crisis management of that particular attack, we actually saw then that the security agencies were not very prepared how they are going to deal with the issue. There were a lot of miscommunication to the extent that the debacle at Westgate extended for a few days. At Dusit, it was quick, and mopping up operations started almost immediately. When it comes to communication, and terrorism it's about the mind. Dr. Gidhua is talking about when this terrorist attack place, Westgate, in fact, the primary target is not the Westgate or Dusit D2 attack. It is actually the policy makers. They're trying to send a message to a third party. And so communication plays a major role here. During Westgate, terrorists successfully took advantage of our own media. The social media where they were on, they were actually giving...
They were even tweeting.
They were tweeting blow by blow. In fact, most people were following Al-Shabaab's Twitter and Facebook posting than our own media. And this meant that they were actually succeeding in their propaganda, in their dark matter that they were trying to put out there. And Jesse, there are two elements here. There's risk communication and then there's crisis communication. I think we've come a long way. Today, what we are doing here is to focus on risk communication, to prepare the Kenyans about what these guys are all about. It's about intimidation, it's about legitimizing their cause, is about recruitment even. But now Kenyans understand that whenever actually there is a terrorist attack, before they used to speak highly, some Kenyans actually used to speak highly of these murderers. But today, everybody, almost everybody, would talk negatively and would condemn these kind of groups who are misusing children, young people, with the kind of narratives and recruitment and attacks that they carry out. So we have come a long way, Jesse. And within the context of the various county action plans, the national strategy for countering violent extremism, all these issues are actually captured there very well. The National Counterterrorism Center worked with communities. It's not just a government work or affair. The center went out to the communities and took views from the communities in order to prepare this strategy, which is owned by Kenyans and it is implemented by Kenyans, and that way we are much more successful in the way we are dealing with terrorism today.
Okay, we'll be back with more on this, especially what the county action plan entails, because in terms of community preparedness, I'd want to know in terms of the approach. Is it like a Nyumba Kumi initiative? I think these are basic questions that Kenyans equally